This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 51 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking with Shira Loa of Snake Therapy. And Shira, what does snake therapy mean to you? Where did you come up with that name? Where did you get it from, and what does it mean to you?
A lot of things. It was inspired first off by my work with an animal therapy nonprofit. So I'm on the board and I do volunteer with an animal therapy nonprofit, and we go out and take animals of all kinds, including reptiles, to kind of bring joy and connection through these visits, to not just do educational visits, but also therapeutic visits to people in care homes and foster kids and people who would not otherwise have the opportunity to hang out with these animals. And I was bringing my snakes and watching the joy and just the beautiful smiles and all of this through that organization really inspired me to kind of take it to the next level, specifically with reptiles and snakes in particular. And, the more that I thought about it and watched it in action, there's physical and sensory benefits to working with these animals and caring for these animals, the calming, the sense of soothing and calming that feeling them on your skin and your body has. So the tactile experience is therapeutic. There's mental health benefits, the cognitive development, the inspiration, learning about them, that's therapeutic, stimulation of curiosity and wonder. Then there's emotional health benefits. So there's therapeutic benefits like just feeling joyful and feeling comfort and even a sense of purpose in caring for them is therapeutic. Getting out of your own head, the way that they kind of ground you in the moment is a big deal. And I've seen this especially with working with and talking with a lot of neurodivergent people who keep reptiles. Then, the social benefits, there's even social benefits of like people who love and care for these animals who may not be very social normally. They have these opportunities to connect with people that they may not normally talk to. And they've got this shared interest. And so they kind of are able to have, more friends and connect with people they never would have otherwise. Behavioral, there's therapeutic benefits in the responsibility of caretaking. And a huge part of this is all about a focus on empathy, increasing our empathy for animals, for each other. So kind of a caretaking as a way of life, and really like valuing compassion and empathy for all living beings, especially these unloved, these creatures that most people think are scary or gross or weird, so yeah, that's snake therapy.
All right. So how did you get into keeping snakes? When did that start? And what made you decide to have a pet snake? And and then stick it in a plastic box? And then when did you start? when did you start making the plastic box a habitat? Because that's something that, you know, your social media is, you do incredible work with constructing these environments that your animals thrive in, and you're always trying to do better and learn more and find better ways of giving them care, as am I. I mean, that's a big thing that I'm constantly trying to do is figure out a way to not only, like, there's sort of a selfish pursuit for me as well, because I want to see behavior. I want to see them behave in a more naturalistic way. Right.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if they're, you know, cause I do keep, and we'll get into all this. I do keep some of my younger animals in tubs, right. In rack systems. And unless I am opening it, there is zero interaction or enjoyment there.
Yeah.
You know, so when I'm so enthusiastic setting up a new enclosure, and of course my ADHD wants it done immediately. You know, I was talking to one of my Patreon members, Jamie, and it was like the ADHD side of me just wants that immediate gratification, you know, and watching what you do, the way that it's like, yeah, it's layer upon layer upon layer of building these enclosures. And you know, for me, I go out and I cut branches off of my tree, and then I bake them and I stick them in. You're actually making the branches, which is wild. And I want to talk to you about just sort of, you know, some of the products that you use on that and all that. But anyway, so my question was, what was your first snake? When did you get into reptiles, and what was your draw to them?
So I'll first clarify. I like to call it caretaking instead of keeping these days. Okay. But I was terrified of snakes. Absolutely didn't want anything to do with them until I was about 18 or 19. And then it all changed, just like in an instant. And it was just having an experience like I give through the zoo of like just a safe environment with an animal and being like, oh my God, I had no idea how amazing these animals were. I just had all these things in my head that this is how they are and they scare me, and, you know, and that all just went away. So the next day I went out and got one. Now, was that a stupid thing to do? Absolutely stupid. I didn't know what I was doing. And it was the 90s, you know, so back then there was really not a lot of information about how to keep well, you know, and how to like really care for these animals. They were just like, newspaper and water bowl and you're good, you know, like didn't talk about gradients and like any of that. So I feel really horrible for that animal. However, he and I were buddies for 20 years. Wow. He was like my best bud. I took him everywhere. I moved across the country multiple times with him. And
what kind of snake was it?
A BCI, boa constrictor imperator, which I was, you know, they told me it was a red-tailed boa, which, you know, that's, you know, not really the case. But anyway, yeah. So he was my only snake for many, many years, like, I don't know, 15 years. And then I got a few.
How big did he get? Was he like a little baby when you got him?
He was a year and a half already when I got him. And he got a little over 6 feet. But I didn't care for him very well. So I think I probably stunted his growth a little bit.
I think that sounds like a reasonable size for a male BI.
Yeah, he was like a little over 6 feet. But you know, and I didn't obviously do everything wrong.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he lived 20 years.
He lived 20 years. He was 21 and a half when he died. And so I did get some other snakes at the very end of his life. But then when he died, I just was so, I mean, you're with an animal for 20 years and have a relationship like he and I did. It was really devastating. And so I stepped away from it for a while, but I still loved snakes. And, that sign up there, snake wranglers, from my days working in festival building. And I was like the person that would go relocate the rattlesnake or the gopher snake or whatever so that it wouldn't get run over by our vehicles or killed by somebody. So I was still in love with them. And then I just finally was like, I really miss having these animals in my life. And I think it was 2019. Yeah, 2019. I decided to get another snake, and I decided to actually research and was blown away. Like all of a sudden, oh my God, there's all this stuff on YouTube. And, back when I started that didn't exist. So that was when I kind of went, okay, I'm going to do it right this time. And I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. So I got a Mexican black king snake to start. And then I was just hooked. I was just like, oh, the more I learn, the more I want to be around these animals, and started kind of sharing that with other people as well. So yeah, now I have 10 snakes in my little family. And yeah, as far as caretaking, I I have to limit. I have to be, I want to limit how many I get, because I actually like to build relationships with them. I think that it's a really important part of having animals in your life is building relationships with them. And then the more you have, the less you're able to do that. And for me personally, that's definitely a thing. Spreading myself too thin. But also because I do want to give them these huge habitats. And so our house only has so much space, so I've got all these upgrades to do. And my husband's like, well, why don't we just turn the living room?
That's nice.
Oh, he's the best. I couldn't do it without him. I mean, I had 3 snakes until we got married and moved here into this house and own a house now. So then it was like,
oh yeah,
look at all this space. But yeah, I love to go beyond the minimum. And that's something I talk a lot about on the channel too, is like, why do we think, well, what's the bare minimum? Why is that the first question that we ask when we talk about getting an animal? It's like, especially a reptile, in particular, reptiles. Because you don't say, I keep dogs, or you don't ask, like, what's the bare minimum I can do for a dog?
Yeah.
And yet we do that with reptiles. So for me, I'm like, what can I do? What more can I do? And I'm constantly learning new things. And so I keep being like, well, I think I could fit an 8-footer over there.
Oh, heck yeah.
How big can I go? Eventually hoping to have actually a facility where it's like zoo style, like huge enclosures. But
yeah, that's my dream too. At least, I mean, there's certain, it's funny you said that, the bare minimum. There's certain animals that I have, that I got them cages thinking, okay, they'll be set for the rest of their life in here because it's the bare minimum. Like a 4x2x2 is the bare minimum for, whatever, one of my male Timor pythons. Right. But now that I've seen some adult Timor pythons, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to enjoy them. They're not going to be able to enjoy an enclosure that's 4x2x2.
Yeah.
So long term, I would like to get them into 6x2x2s or 8x2x2s and, stack them up.
My
So
king
yeah,
snake, my Mexican black king snake's in a 10-foot enclosure.
oh, wow. All right. That's
She
crazy.
uses every single inch of it. Every
Yeah.
inch. And I mean, I love this animal. She is so incredible. And I'm one of those people, like, I get really confused when people talk about Mexican black king snakes being dumb and always trying to eat you, because mine is like the most social, sweet animal on the planet. But I noticed that, she was bored as hell in her 4x2.
Yeah.
And so I went ahead, and that was my first kind of big build, was building out this 10-foot enclosure for her. And I can see her having double the space because
Wow.
she just uses every bit of it. Climbing, basking, hiding, like all of it. All of it. So
Yeah.
that's the evidence to me. And then I do have a BCI that he'll stay in one place for weeks
Yeah.
at
It's
a time.
incredible.
And I'm still going to give him an 8-foot enclosure.
Yeah.
I'm still going to do it. And I'm going to hope that, when he gets older, he starts to come out a little bit more. But at least I'm giving him the options,
Yeah.
to do so. And he'll like pick a spot for a month or so, and then he'll pick a different spot. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
kind of part of their nature. They're ambush, generalists. They just kind of sit and wait.
How often do you feed him?
He's at about 3 weeks now.
Okay.
2 to 3, depending on the size of the meal. But usually I've started to go to 3. I've started to be more conscious of not overfeeding.
Sure.
Because especially because he's such a lump, because he
Yeah.
doesn't exercise a lot, that I don't want him to get overweight. But yeah, I don't know. Do you want to talk about the building stuff? Because it is really fun.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just I just want to say real quick, my Argentine boa, over the winter, I slowed down her feeding a lot, and she went every four. I was feeding her every 4 to 5 weeks. I think the longest she went was 6 weeks. And when, because it was cooler in the room, and I noticed she was still shedding, everything was still normal. But I really am focused on the longevity, and, so I'm not worried about her having a litter of 40 neonates,
Right.
within X amount of years. My concern is how long can I have her? And because she's a very special snake to me.
How old is she?
She's how old is she? She's got to be 3 now.
Okay.
So she's got to be 3 years old now, and she's about 6.5 foot.
Oh wow.
And what was cool was, she can be a lump and just sit there, and especially when she's being well fed. But when she was at that 4 or 5 week point, she started to cruise a lot more.
Yeah.
And she's in a 6x2x2, and she has sort of 2/3 the enclosure are there's branches that are kind of mounted to the wall with stainless steel lag screws. And right before I fed her, it was like the day before. It's like she knew that I had just pulled all the freezer, or like gone through the freezer and pulled all the feeders out. And she was up on that branch with her head in that S position, just staring down. And they always, I've talked about this before, they always do it like near or over the water bowl. And
He does that too.
Yeah, it has to be that they have to know that mammals rely heavily on water sources.
Right.
And they, in their snake brains, they must just be thinking like, okay, if something's going to walk through here, it's going to be right here. This is where they're going to come through.
That's interesting, because he does that too. At night, he'll extend out to often hover over the water bowl or rest his chin on the water bowl. And no matter where he is in the enclosure, he'll extend out and do that. Or if he's got a perch, he'll go over the water bowl. And I never thought about that. He's 2.5, so he's still pretty young.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely move his feeding out further as he ages. But I tried to encourage him. Like, I was like, okay, I'm not going to feed you on that side. You're already on that. I'm going to try and get you to come over here, and like trying to feed him. And he just kept extending from that one spot. And I'm just like, oh, come on, dude. And most of my snakes, I mean, they all have their own personalities. They're all very unique. And that's part of what is so enjoyable too about getting to know them, and like trying to encourage them to do different things and see what they like and what they don't. And yeah, but I get it. I love seeing their habits, and then seeing them kind of grow and change those habits too. And like what you do and how you change their environments, it's like a relational thing, you know. It's this adaptive care. I don't know if you talk to Roy Blodgett, and he talks about adaptive care, and I think about it as like also responsive care. It's like learning about them and seeing what their preferences are, but then offering them other things and seeing what they do with it, and then responding to that, and kind of having this relationship with them and learning about them. And the more that we offer them, the more we're going to see from them. You know, I think that's one of the other problems I have with, you know, putting them in tubs, is that you can't get the pleasure of enjoying their natural behaviors, but you also can't like have that kind of adaptive relationship with them, because you can't see what they're doing. You don't know what they like, you know. But that's part of the fun for me personally.
Yeah, and I think one of the most influential sort of just somebody that is really big in the hobby and has a big presence in the hobby, that's really that I really respect for talking about this a lot, is Dr. Justin Julander. He's always talking about giving his animals more to get that naturalistic behavior out of them. And talking about how the hobby is moving in that direction, and how he's happy to see that. And, you know, and when he started, you know, he talks about how it was, you know, it's kind of the bare minimum. We know that we can give these animals like the bare minimum amount of care, and they will thrive and probably live a decade or two, you know, what we would consider to be a long life. But if you provide that extra, you know, enrichment and exercise and movement. And I talked about this before. I have a Papuan carpet, and he was in a tub. And when I put him in his 4x2x2, he had like 3 bowel movements within a couple days. And so it was that lack of movement, I think, that like it was causing him to retain stool, because he wasn't moving. And then as soon as he went in there, every time I go in this room at night, he's cruising around that enclosure. He's somewhere. He's up in the branches. He's poking his head out from under one of the palm trees, whatever. He's moving around and getting exercise. Yeah. So it makes you wonder. And, you know, you hear about like, and I can't speak to this because I've never bred an animal, but it makes you wonder about, like, you hear stories about females getting egg bound and, you know, retaining eggs and things like that. And it makes you wonder if part of that could be from an inability to move and stretch out and exercise and get that extra movement in while they have the eggs inside of them, or the babies, if it's a boa.
Yeah. Not to mention if you're breeding in racks, you know, the sun is a thing.
Yeah.
UVB, UVA, UV, like all these things and photo periods, right? These are all things that stimulate their natural biological processes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if they're not getting that, then I mean, sure, people are successfully breeding them. It's not like they can't breed in that situation. But why are we doing the minimum? Why are we not going, what else can I do? And what makes the most sense to me is what is more natural to an animal. And these are animals that are, you know, I don't know. It just seems like common sense to me. I'm not a breeder. And I am also not saying that racks and tubs don't have any practical use. There are particular situations where, quarantine or whatever, you need to understand and see what's going on and have it be a sterile environment. But I don't understand why that is the fallback or the
Yeah.
norm. It's so normalized.
Or for the life of the animal. It's kind of like
Exactly.
if I have two kids, and when I had newborns, they were confined to safe areas, right? But I wouldn't keep my 5-year-old in the crib in a playpen. Like there's, as and that is actually, Nick Mutton actually said that to me. Like if you have a newborn, they're in a safe, secure area where you can monitor them, and as they grow, their space to explore should grow with them. So it's I can see the thought behind that,
Right,
and
but
before we
snakes aren't born like humans with inability to do anything. That's the
sure.
difference there, is that human beings are born as like helpless, completely helpless creatures that cannot function. We're unique in that way, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Whereas when the reptiles are born, they're ready to go. They're like gonna go hunt. They're gonna go seek the sun. They're gonna do whatever they do. And they're more vulnerable, for sure. They're more vulnerable,
Well,
but then
yeah, and that's the thing too, right? Is that you're getting probably a dozen offspring compared to one.
mhm.
So they're they have the numbers. So out of that dozen, how many are going to die out in nature
But
because they're out
from
there?
predation, right? And there's no predation
Absolutely.
in captivity.
Well, I mean predation, but I mean, boy, I'd love it. And maybe there is research on this. How many die from exposure to the elements? How many die from going out into an area that they shouldn't have went out into, and the temperature gets too high and they just bake in the sun? I mean, I see it. So
Mhm.
being in Florida during the rainy season at the beginning, all the frogs multiply like crazy, right? We hear them
Mhm.
all singing at night, and we have a pond out back and there's eggs everywhere, right? And then
Mhm.
every now and then you see them, you just find dried up little baby frog carcasses like all over the place, like, and it's just because, I mean, that they have the numbers, and that baby frog is ready to do its thing, right? It turns into a frog from a tadpole, and it starts hopping away, and it's like, I can catch my own bugs, and then it's there it is in the middle of the yard, a little frog jerky that my
Oh.
dog is going to try to eat. So it makes you wonder if the most successful animals are the ones that find, because I've heard people talk about this too. I think I've heard it on NPR
Hmm.
and from Eric Burke, is like the microclimates that the babies might find, that they find a microclimate under a rock, and if they're one of those fortunate dozen, they have to be the most likely to survive, right? Because now they're in this spot that's probably a constant temperature with humidity, and maybe little lizards are going in there, so they have their food source, or little frogs, so they're able to, have a consistent supply of food because it's a shared space. So yeah, I mean, there's so much that we don't know about them because they are such a cryptic animal. They're so,
Yeah.
we just don't know. We don't know how they
We
live
don't
their
know. We don't
lives.
know enough. Yeah. Do you listen to herpetological highlights? an amazing podcast. It's
No,
really,
but
really
I need
great.
to.
Highly recommend. And it's two herpetologists from the UK talking about, they basically take research papers and help you understand them. They like go through them, and it's really funny. But they also go into the field, and they are herpetologists. And a lot of times they talk about how little we know about snakes just because they're so hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like there's so many species that we know so little about, and it's because they hide, or they're fossorial, or they're just hard to find in nature, and hard to find enough research on, because they're going out there and it takes them weeks to find one,
Yeah.
so there's so much we don't know.
Yeah.
And that being said, in captivity, I think the best thing that we could do is to offer them those varying microclimates, offer them that gradient, give them as much as we possibly can, and see what they gravitate towards, because they're not stupid. They're going to do what they need. Like, they're going to go to the spot that feels right. They're going to go to the humid spot when they need humidity. They're going to go to the warm spot when they need warmth. They're going to show you what their preferences are, so you can then kind of adapt and change around that. But if we don't give them that, then we are controlling what their environment is, and they're all individuals too, and it's based on the species too. So it's like, I don't know. I see it as, let's give as much as we possibly can and go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are so different, especially when you keep like 2 or 3 of the same exact species that really, comes out, or 4 or 5, or, whatever. All of a sudden you're like, man, these are 3 individuals, or these are 4 individuals. Even my boa imperators, my female, always out. She's always out, always basking, always laying around, just in there's never a time I can't not see her, and then my
cool.
male, and then my male, who is IMG Motley, I never see him. Like when I never ever see him, and then every now and then when I go to take him out, then I'm like, geez, I can't believe how much you've grown, but it's because I haven't, he's just more, he lives a more private life, I guess you could say. He utilizes his hides.
Mine's a motley too, and I sometimes wonder about the genetic stuff, and we are creating breeds now of animals. This is supposed to, like, we're domesticating these animals now by playing around with their genetics and all of that, and there's inevitably inbreeding in there, and I wonder sometimes about how that affects their behavior, cognitive, all of that stuff. He's technically the only morph I have, and my other BCI, my first snake, he was always out, active, like curious, and
that was just a normal, like a Colombian?
Just common boa. But this guy that I have now, and I love him to death, and he's sweet, and it's taken a long time to get him over being head shy and all that. But he's coming along, but he's just
special.
not very curious, I've had to like make a lot of effort. Like I don't like pull him out a lot. I've just been trying to do more trust building stuff, and so now I'll go in and I'll put my hand in, and he's allowing me to give him chin rubs and that kind of thing. But will he come out to me? He will not. He will not. Once he's out, he's totally fine. But he's just, I don't know. There's something I'm like, sometimes I wonder about you.
And I thought the same thing about my IMG Motley, because he is the way he eats, like he doesn't bite and wrap like
Really?
energetically. He bites, and if I shake it around, he will wrap, but otherwise he bites, and then he's just like, okay, this is mine now, and he just drags it away,
I have another snake that I call it, he takes his food very politely.
Yeah.
And he just very gently takes it off the tongs, and then he wraps. That's my Dominican red mountain boa. But he's such a big, powerful snake that he could totally like strike, and but he just very gently takes it off the tongs, and then he's wrapping it up in the trees. But the BCI I have he makes me jump every single time still.
Oh, really? Yeah, I mean, I get that. My Argentine, the big girl, it's like a shotgun blast when she grabs her rat. I mean, it is, the amount of force is bananas. And when I go, I feed her in a separate tote, just because I'm giving her the rats. She's getting like a extra large or a large rat, depending. I try to vary the size. And when she gets that, they're always wet, and like it just squeezes all that rat water into the enclosure, and then it smells in the enclosure, and and then I also had some exploding rats.
Oh God, that's the worst.
Yeah, that was like just so nasty. So I feed her in her own separate tub. That way the mess is kind of contained. But
what about getting her back in?
Like, yeah, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, because when I go back in the tub, she's like, "Oh, cool, another rat," you know, and
and handling them after is kind of like, I'm always worried about handling them after, because I don't want to, disturb them and make them.
Yeah. So I put the tub right in front of the door, so the door is open, and it's just I try to break that feed response, which is very difficult because she's just so keyed up. And it's weird. It's like she's a different animal. It's like my dog being locked onto a rabbit. It's like a different animal, because she's normally so curious, and she's so different from the BIs. Like when I open up the door, she just loves to come out and explore, just very active, very curious, hates being in the enclosure, always wants to come out. Anybody that has listened to this podcast knows I think that BCOs are the best snake in the entire world. You should get one, Shira. You should. Because
when I have an addition to the house.
yeah.
And I can give them a room. That's why I don't have a scrub pythons, because I would give them a whole room.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if I had one animal that would get a whole room and it would just be a pet, it would be a Burmese python for sure.
Oh, wow. Yeah, not so much for you in Florida, huh?
Yeah, not so much. Not so much. Unfortunately. Yeah, and even that, like I want to go find those in the wild, but then they have like rules where you have to kill them, and it's like that sucks. But at the same time, you understand that there's a lot of that they're doing a lot of damage to the environment, but so are all the sugar fields and in Florida. So are all the cats. Yeah, the cats, the sugar. It's funny that I recently was talking to somebody, and they told me that a lot of the blame for the animals that have been disappearing from the Everglades goes towards the Burmese pythons, but they actually think it's from the sugar, because they grow all the sugar and then they burn all the crops.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, so it's just totally changed the ecology.
Yeah.
And granted, Burmese pythons are definitely doing a number, right? Like anything that comes in front of them that they can eat, they're going to eat. And the things that they can't eat, they still eat, and then they die.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a problem, and I'm not saying it's not.
But habitat loss is much more dramatic.
I believe,
and I think much bigger of an issue, and I don't think we want to look at that. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
agriculture doesn't want you to look at that. The state doesn't want you to look at that because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
subsidies and money. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, but anyway,
Anyway,
so creating the enclosures,
right.
when did that start? Because you are an artist, right? So
I am an
you're
artist. I've always been an artist. I spent over 2 decades as a metalworker, and a
mm,
fabricator, built large scale installation art and all sorts of fun stuff. So I'm pretty handy. I have a lot of tools, probably more than most people. And when I had major back surgery a few years ago, and I kind of had to take a break from
mm,
welding and metalworking and stuff. And I really missed making things with my hands. And I realized, like, well, I could get pretty fun and creative with what I do for the animals. And I got very inspired by people like Brad from Brad's Bioactive Builds and Victoria from At Passionate Snakes, seeing what they were doing with their enclosures. I was like, wait a minute, this could be an art form. And
mm,
that's what it's become to me, as a creative outlet as well as, and it's even better because I'm like, I'm not just doing this as a creative outlet, it's also going to be really great for the animal. And I
mhm,
try really hard to think about, okay, yes, I want this to look such and such a way, but like, what is going to benefit this particular animal? So try and think about it that way. But I go all in because it's art to me too. Um, so I started doing that, I don't know, last year. I started really going for it. And that Mexican black king snake enclosure was my first kind of foray. And now I'm hooked. So
nice.
they're all getting it. They're all getting it.
That's awesome. So, can I ask you something? Have
Mhm.
you always done metalworking in an art form, or have you ever done anything industrially like
No, I was
fabrication?
a fabricator too.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah. So I started off in art, and then just kind of, it was at the end of school, I kind of realized, wait, metal is really my medium, but I didn't learn enough about it in school. So I did a lot of apprenticeships. And that meant I just learned from anybody everywhere across the country, did apprenticeships with all metals and all mediums and like methods, right? And then for work, did definitely take on welding and fabrication. As I was working with production companies, we were building giant installations and giant stages and all of these things. So I definitely was a fabricator for those things too. So it was a combination of stuff.
That's dope. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for your service. We need fabricators. People don't realize that. I mean, because I'm in an industrial environment and the professionally, and without fabricators, I mean, there is no hope for survival. Like you need people welding together pieces of metal to make things work, to hold things together, and create tools. And people
Yeah.
don't realize that so many things that being in public utilities, so many of the things that I interface with are
Mm.
custom made by fabricators nearby. And
Yeah,
so
and it's
it's an
hard. It
it
is
is, yeah.
hard on the body. I mean, that's part of why I kind of walked away from the fabrication side after a while, was because, like, I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this, and then I had all these back problems, you know. But yeah, mad respect, and also just like, it's fascinating, and it's so
Hmm.
cool to be able to make anything. Like,
Yeah.
I can make anything if I really want to, which is
Yeah.
so cool and very empowering. Um,
You could make a container facility zoo.
yeah, I could. I
I
could. I've
I
thought
have a friend that's a
thought about
welder and a
it.
fabricator, and he's got an entire container house, like a multi-story
Yeah.
container house, and it is such a cool thing. And the entire thing is art. The
Yeah.
entire thing is an expression of him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool.
It's so cool.
Yeah. So it's it's fun. I kind of just play around with what I've learned from watching other people, and then I start to kind of experiment. I started off with spray foam and insulation foam, but then I wanted to go further with it, so I've been doing shaping PVC to make branches, and then I went, well, they could look much more natural if I went the next level and used epoxy clay, and texture the epoxy clay, make it look realistic. And how do I join things together, and how do I mount things, and like, can I make it removable? Now I have a removable thing. Can I turn it? So I love figuring that stuff out. It's really fun for me. Is to just like, well, also I use Apex enclosures for almost all of my snakes, and they're expandable. So when they're ready, I can actually just add on to them instead of starting a whole new one. So then I
Oh,
start to
nice.
go, okay, I'm going to build this so that when I expand, this wall is not connected to that wall, and this branch can turn and expand to the next. So it's all like a fun puzzle for me. It's really, I
That's
really
so
enjoy
cool. And longevity has to be a concern, right? Because sometimes you put so much. Because I've done enclosures with spray foam and things like that, and
it.
then it'll separate and contract,
Yep.
and you end up with all these problems where
I
it's like,
hate
man,
spray foam.
I put so much effort into
Yeah.
this, and it's literally falling apart in front of me,
Yeah.
and I think I ended up doing a lot of like cork bark mosaics, which held up really well, where I would just take tiny chunks of cork bark and silicone them to the back of aquariums, and then stuff sphagnum moss in it. And
Hmm.
plants like really love that as a medium for growth.
Yeah.
I had a lot better results with that than I did with the spray foam.
Yeah. The first one I did was I used a lot of spray foam and learned right away that I kind of hate spray foam. I
Yeah.
was like, I can see cracks, and that really bothered me. So then it was, okay, how can I go without, like, with the minimum amount? And man, this zoopoxy stuff, polygem zoopoxy, is just taking things to the next level. Like, you can coat everything in it, do all these crazy textures, you can build with it, and it is so strong.
Mm.
It'll hold everything together. You can paint it, you can drill it, it's really,
Wow.
really cool. So that's really changed the game
So is
because,
that like a two-part and you mix it together? And then how
yeah,
long is it pliable for?
it's pliable for quite a while.
Okay.
There's a thickening agent. So there's part A and part B, and then there's a thickening agent. And the more
Mm.
thickening agent you use, you can basically like create your own texture of it.
Oh, wow.
But it's pliable for like an hour or two at least. And the texturing, depending on how much time you let you go after you, or how much thickening agent you put in it, is going to mean like, oh, I need to texture this sooner than later, or it's going to be
Hmm.
easier to texture. Um, so I do it in batches, and that's the only downside, is kind of just like, you make, a ball this much and it'll go pretty far. But then you have to start the whole thing over again and make more.
Mm.
And but it is so versatile that it's worth it, because you can build
Yeah.
upon what you've already done with it too. So if
So you
I
can just
like,
keep adding on to
you
it.
can keep adding. Yeah. So if I do a whole thing and then I'm like, I think I need a little protrusion here so that I can put plants in it, you can just build right off of it. It's,
Nice.
yeah, it's really, really,
How
it's really
how
cool.
bad are the VOCs from that? Like, do you have to be in a well ventilated area, or can you do it indoors?
I do it indoors. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like zoo. It's made. I know zoos use it for zoo quality and enclosures. I personally coat all of my stuff now, including anything I've painted with Drylock or acrylic. I coat everything with EcoPoly sealant.
Hmm.
um, because like I did this one in dry lock and, mix of dry lock and acrylic, and dry lock has this sandy texture and it seals everything. But I don't know if you've used this before, but urates just never go away. Like I can scrub and use, cleaning stuff, and I'll be like, okay, it's clean. And then when it dries, you still see a white spot of urates. Whereas when you put Ecopoly, which it's no VOCs, clear sealant, so it's completely safe. The liquid beads up on it. You can use cleaning solution on it and it's just like, whoop, gone. So
Nice.
now that's like an extra step, but it is so worth it. So that's another material that I use now.
So what is it called? Zoopoxy. So you do the Zoopoxy.
The Zoopoxy first.
And then you texture that and
texture that and then paint. And now I'm just using acrylics mostly because you just don't need
whatever you can get from a craft shop or
non-toxic. Yeah, cheap non-toxic paints. Mix those and kind of just go from there and layer and layer and layer. And then so that last one that I did, the rainforest build, that was like the first time I got like really like, I'm gonna make the habitat that this snake comes from. I'm gonna go that route instead of like cool rocks.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to try that. And so I referenced trees that came from the Colombian rainforest and I made a couple of those. And, the rocks look like the photos that I grabbed from iNaturalist where the snakes were.
Oh, wow.
And I love it. It's the first time I'm like, okay, I'm getting somewhere. This is really fun. Because how cool is it? I mean, you could go bioactive, and I don't yet. And people are always like, why don't you just use real plants? I'm like, well, I do.
Because they're a pain in the ass.
They're a pain in the ass. And the snakes will kill them, or I will kill them, or they get too close to the heating, and so they shrivel and die. And I couldn't get a Colombian mahogany to fit in my enclosure, but now I do. And she's up in it every night. Every night. She loves it. She's like draped across that tree every night. It is such a joy. Like that is total snake therapy to me because you spend so much effort on creating this thing for your animal and seeing them use it. Oh, so rewarding. It's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty cool. I might have to play around with that at some point. I don't know if my ADHD will be able to take it.
I'm ADHD too, man.
I don't know how you do it because I watch you going like phase by phase and all these layers.
Many projects.
Yeah. I know. So I get angry. I get angry when my projects aren't done.
Yeah. For me, it's like I get frustrated when I cannot see some kind of progress. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be finished. Of course, I love to finish projects, but having been a metal worker, like you don't cut corners. You do not get results right away. Like this is not a simple like one and done. Like it's all about process. There is so much process in doing good metal work, and that's something I learned and kind of loving the process and finding meditation in the process of making and not cutting corners. So for me and my need to achieve and feel like I've done something is seeing some kind of progress. And, I have days where it doesn't go anywhere and I get really frustrated and I'm like, got to walk away from this and walk away for a day or something. But as long as I can see some development, then that helps me for sure.
Yeah, that's I think my problem is too is that like this wall of caging that I just got. I want to get it done so bad because I want to get the animals out of their grow out tubs. So
Yeah.
it's, they're in their tubs. When I take them out, I think, oh my God, you've gotten so big, and you hate me because you never get to see me or interact with me.
No.
So, it's like, I want to get you, at least if they're in their enclosure and they still bite at me and everything, I'll be more okay with it, where it's like, okay, well, at least it's not the tub that's causing that, it's just who they are as an individual, they're just a little spicy, and that's fine too.
Yeah. Well, there's also, the more time you spend with them, the more you put in, the more you get. And
Sure.
the more you spend patience, having patience with them, because these are not animals that are, conditioned to want to spend time with a giant ape.
Yeah.
It takes time sometimes,
Yeah.
and sometimes more than with others because they're individuals, and I think I get frustrated with people being like they're spicy or they're like mean, because no, they're not mean. They're not mean. They're defensive. They're not
Sure.
aggressive. They're defensive, or they're food motivated, but
They can be all those things and be spicy though.
okay. But you can also watch, if you take the time, you can see results usually.
Yeah.
There are always
Yeah,
going to be exceptions, but
it is it's habituation. I mean, you're
yeah,
habituating them to the presence of you, and that's all you're doing. You're desensitizing them to something that would be a potential predator out in nature. That's all there is to it. I mean, if
exactly.
there is no snake out in the wild that would come in contact with a mammal of our size,
Right.
and it wouldn't be problematic.
Right. Right.
There is no in nature, there's no relationship between primates and snakes where they hang out together.
Right. Right. But in this situation, like if you don't spend the time to show them, to offer them this opportunity to trust you and to show them that you're trustworthy, then people who are like, oh, they're spicy, it's because you don't try. Like you have to spend time, and you can't expect them to just instantly love you,
Yeah.
And like this little girl, my Japanese rat snake, I've had her for just over a year, and I'm still working on it with her, and she doesn't bite. And now finally, I'll go up to her with my hand and she won't dash away instantly. And that is progress. Once she's out, she's totally fine. But in her enclosure, she's still rattle her tail at me. And, it takes, and I'm really trying to just let that be okay and just go at her pace, because she's going to be big. She's going to be a very big, active snake. And I really want her to fully trust me when she's nice and big, and be able to take her to little zoo events, because she's gorgeous. I want people to be able to see her, and I want her not to be stressed out,
Yeah, and that I have certain snakes that I am just okay with not handling them, like my Timor pythons, because it is so it's got to be so traumatic for them and stressful, and it's just who they are. It's just how that snake is as a species. They're very just flighty, and they dump urates as soon as you pick them up, and it's so it's kind of like, do I want to put my priorities first,
right,
and habituate them and desensitize them to my presence, or do I just want to accept them for what they are and just say it's okay if I treat them more like a fish in an aquarium, where I can enjoy them and enjoy watching their behavior. And who knows, if a wall gets broken through from the limited interactions that we do have, that'll be fantastic. But I don't want to force it on them because I think that when I was trying that for a period of time, uh, they had less of a food response.
Mm.
So it was okay. So that amount of handling, and even though it was brief sessions, and it was for me thinking, well, I want them to be habituated to me, but at what cost? To the point where then they are
Huh.
thinking like, okay, is it safe to come out and get food, or is he going to grab me again? So
Huh.
like looking at it from that perspective, I have animals where I'm okay with that, where it's like, you know what, that's fine. Like perch up in your branch and I can appreciate you there. And what I really appreciate and get enjoyment from is opening the door and holding a chick up and having them fly out with incredible, vigor and energy. Uh,
Well, if that's what you
that
enjoy, then they're better for it. They don't have to like be, you know, they don't have to do anything that they wouldn't naturally do.
exactly.
That's fine.
And also it come, and then you have other animals where it comes down to the individual personalities. We have two ball pythons. Our female is a little puppy dog, and our male is just terrified, where his body
Oh,
goes rigid like a stick, and he
oh,
tries to flatten himself out. And
oh no.
and maybe, and he came from Canova, and I think
Ah,
it was like a few weeks after I got him, I heard that they have like this program where they're like, more pet snakes. And I'm like,
yeah, I
well,
heard
I
about
wish
that.
that would have been a thing.
I mean, I would yeah. I think, look, I really, really value when breeders work with their animals and socialize them first. I mean, that is,
Hmm.
I think, as far as breeding for pets goes, that is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
I think to pay extra for that is great. I mean, I just got my most recent snake that I now have is a Ramphiophis oxyrhynchus, which is a rufous beak snake, and they're really rare. And they're rare fanged venomous too, and that's new for me. And someone, when I was doing research on them, said like, if you get this snake and you give it what it actually needs and take it out of a tub and give it UVB and all and the heat that it needs, because they like over 100 degrees.
Wow.
Um, if you give it what it needs, it might not be as docile as it was when you met it first time.
Mm,
She's great. She's great.
nice.
The even though she was in a tub and all of that, the breeder actually spent time with her, and she's awesome. She's totally like, I mean, she's different than any other snake I've ever worked with for sure, but she is socialized to the point where she's going to be great when we hang out even more. And I was
Yeah.
worried about it, but I was like, she's such a fascinating species that no matter what happens, I'm still going to enjoy it. Like I kind of accepted that maybe this is not going to be a snake I handle. And I think she's going to be great. So
That's awesome.
I really appreciate that. And I think it's extremely valuable, especially with newer people that are newer to caretaking for reptiles who are looking for a handleable animal that they can have a relationship with. That if the snake isn't socialized, then that makes it harder, and it makes that relationship building and the bonding. And I talk about this a lot on the channels. Like we can have bonds with these creatures. We can.
Hmm.
We just have to work at it. But if you don't have that, your care isn't going to be as good.
Yeah.
Like we care more for things. Like if we have a connection with something, we're going to give it better care, right? Like it's just kind of makes sense. The more you care for something, the more you feel connected with it, the better you're going to treat it. And so that I think is very valuable in the pet trade is socialization, because the more that somebody connects with that animal, the better they're going to treat it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and you know, my oldest son, he loves that male ball python. So it's like, well, I'll let you put in the work. You know, if you want to sit on the couch and have him sit on your lap, and you know, maybe we'll break through a wall at some point where he's
Yeah.
just more okay with being handled. You know, that'll be great. Uh, but if he doesn't, then we'll just have to say, you know, this is just who he is.
This is
You
who
know,
he
that's
is. Yeah.
yeah.
I
He's
do.
just
Yeah.
stressed out.
I do have one snake that it's not because, well, I don't handle him because he has osteomyelitis. So he's got kinks.
Oh, I watched that video. Yeah.
Yeah. And he developed that. He's over
That's so
5.
crazy.
It's
That
so
was
weird.
bacteria, right?
So it's caused by salmonella, which is
Mm,
fascinating to me because most snakes and reptiles have salmonella in their systems and
yeah.
it doesn't hurt them. But
Yeah, we do too.
the vets don't understand why this happens to some snakes.
Mm,
And so it's an infection in the spine that causes inflammation. And so that creates these kinks. And it was like a year before the kinks started, that he was getting weird. And he was like, I do not like to be handled. Like he was never snappy. He was just like really uncomfortable. And I didn't
mm,
know that's what was going on. So I didn't handle him as much. And he's actually doing really well considering. Um, but I don't handle him
mm,
because I handle him to weigh him and to check his body. But I really limit it, and that's for his benefit. I'm sad. I miss hanging out with him. He's a total sweetheart. But yeah, other than that, I don't have any snakes that are like terrified or spicy, or they all have their own, personalities and how much or how little they like to be engaging with me.
yeah.
And that's okay. That's part of the experience. I like
Yeah.
it.
One of my Patreon members, Yuki, he's in the Netherlands and he has a bearded dragon. And when he takes it outside and it gets natural sunlight, its whole personality changes. So it's a puppy dog inside, and you get it the UV, and it starts displaying its you know, puffs out its beard and puts on this big threat display. And yeah, it totally changes the animal. So
Huh. Is he
yeah,
not
it's
giving it
interesting.
UVB in the enclosure?
No, it has it, but the sunlight is, I mean,
It's different. Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's the
different. It's
sun.
just a different
It's
animal.
the
Yeah.
perfect. It's
Yeah.
the perfect light and heat.
Well, and you know, my female BI, she loves to bask. And when we were going from sort of when the room was cooler, I had a higher wattage bulb in her cage, and we just went through like a transition back to it being hotter. So she had a 40 watt, and her basking spot was like, I don't know, 102, 104, something like that. And she was still sitting in it. And I went in there and she was like, just wanted to latch on to me. Like, and it was bizarre. I'd never seen that kind of
Weird.
behavior from her. Yeah. And it was like, I wonder if I'm, you know, if she just like really wants that heat. And then like once she gets heated up, she's just like, if that's like her sort of default setting, you know, like I don't know, you know, and it'll be interesting because I plan on keeping snakes outdoors. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see that. I mean, right now I'm actually this morning, the whole family, we went out to a plant store and I got some bottle brush, which is a Australian native tree shrub. And so I set up 2 Reptile enclosures that are 2x2x4, 4 feet tall. And so I'm going to put in the bottle brush in its pot and then just fill up the remaining area space with coconut husk up over the pot. And so the diamonds are going to, my 2 female diamond pythons are going to be moved into those enclosures. And so it'll be interesting. I can't wait to get them out there because they've been in tubs. They've been in quarantine on paper. and they're just super curious snakes. Like if
They're beautiful.
diamond pythons are I think, yeah, they're not only are they gorgeous, but I think they have the best personality of any carpet python, maybe even python. I'll just say python. They're because I'm just going to say it. I don't care. They're so curious, and they'll come up to your hand as if they're investigating for food potential, and then realize that you're not food. Like there's just a lot going on there. They're very intelligent. Eric Burke said that if he had started with diamond pythons, it probably would have been like the only snake he kept.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that now. That's another one. Put that on your list when you get your facility, a diamond python.
Okay.
Because they're next level. They're a very special snake, and also their care requirements are very different. David Kelly believes that when they need to go through sort of a winter phase for their
Makes
longevity.
sense.
Yeah, a lot of diamond pythons, there's this thing called diamond python syndrome where people would get them and they grow them up and they die. They get up, they like under 10 years old, they die. And so there's this thought that they need to go through this sort of food scarcity, low temperatures. I mean, where they come from in Australia goes down to 30 degrees. It's very cold. So
I love this about you, that you are so curious and open to so many different things. And I heard you talk about this actually. And I heard this conversation, and, making the connection between like where they come from, what is natural to these animals is what makes sense, as opposed to this is what we do. This is what the care guide says. This is what the temperature should be at. And like, I thought it too, like, here's your care guide. This is what it needs to be. And now, it's like, go research where they come from.
Yeah.
Look at that. Like, can I go on a little tangent?
Yeah, go for it.
I was at Animal Con, and somebody in the audience, there was a panel, and I'm not going to use any names right now, but there was a panel, and somebody in the audience asked a very well-known content creator, reptile content creator, there's so much information. I'm not going to say it. They said, there's so much information. How am I supposed to know what to believe? And, and this is a real problem. There's so many opinions out there on how to keep these animals in captivity well. The answer that this person gave really depressed me. They said, well, go to a reptile expo and talk to a breeder. And I was just like, what? And luckily there were two other awesome folks there that chimed in and said, why don't you research their natural habitat?
Yeah.
And this is what we should all be doing. If we are going to keep these animals in a box, yes, of course, there's experience from people in who have been keeping these animals in captivity for a while, and we should all talk about what we've learned and what we've, our own experiences of keeping them in healthy, right? And learn from that. There's always going to be good things to learn from that. But I think the core should come from, what is their environment like year round? What do they experience? Do they experience a low of 60? Well, then don't heat them so hot all the time. Travis Wyman, he's like a molecular biologist and an amazing breeder keeper. And he was talking about how he turns off his UVB at random times throughout the day. As if clouds are covering, because they're not always blasted with sunlight.
Yeah.
And I was like, like it makes so much sense. But when we're carrying it in captivity in these like mini environments, we're trying, especially people like me who's like, I'm perfectionist and wants everything to be perfect, but nature
Yeah.
is not perfect. And there's variation. And I think encouraging people to really go on iNaturalist, go on the weather channels and go explore, go to the places, go there,
Yeah.
and see what it's like in the winter and in the summer. It's going to inform your care a lot, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the coolest things about keeping these animals is their natural history and finding out where do they come from and what is it like, and is it perfect all year round? Is it almost, is it always 78 to 84 degrees, and
Yeah.
and could they find a rock that is heated up to whatever 105 degrees, and hey, if it is, and those environments exist, right, like a lot of the Indonesian species, that it's pretty much wet, or it's pretty much warm throughout the year, and they get more of a change in humidity and rainfall and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's diamond pythons, and a really cool snake to me, one that I absolutely love, and I really need to get some of them when I have the room, is black milk snakes, and I
Oh,
love them so
interesting.
much because of their color change. They start out tricolor and
Yeah.
then they go completely black, which is super cool.
Yeah.
But additionally, they're coming from the Costa Rican cloud forests.
Mm.
So their elevation is 4,000 to 7,000 feet. So it's cool, and I've dealt with people that have kept them in the past, and they're just like, yeah, I just keep them ambient. They don't need a hot spot
Hmm.
because they're coming from this place that is cool and misty and wet, and it's year round because of the elevation. It's
But
not
it's not the
experience.
same temperature everywhere, right? There's going to be little mini gradients, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, you're not, it's going to be mostly, and even in your house, you're going to have a fluctuation in temperatures going
Yeah,
from winter to summer to spring.
totally.
And that's what I get in this room right here. And in this room right here that I'm in, I could never keep a diamond python in here in good conscience. I couldn't do it
Hmm.
because it just wouldn't get cold enough, and
Yeah.
I really feel that the best thing to do is either live up north where you have a room that's going to get really cold, like Eric Burke has. I mean, we were doing the podcast and he has his diamond pythons on the wall alongside him, and it was like 50 something degrees in that room.
Oh my
you
God.
know
Yeah. Wow.
so like
Wow.
they need that, those snakes need that, and
Yeah.
so there is no one size fits all, and if you
No.
can't, you if you want to, get one snake and keep it identical to the rest of your snakes, it better be all the same snakes, or they're all coming
Right.
from sort of the same area of the world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. And part of the joy is learning about that stuff too. I mean, that's
Hmm.
therapeutic to me. It can be stressful too. Um,
Oh yeah.
like I get stressed out because I'm like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I don't know enough. I have to research more. And, I'm like,
I love this
I'm,
hobby so much, but it's freaking me out.
I know. I'm supposed to be the snake therapy lady, and here I am stressing. And that's a real thing. I mean, like I have anxiety. I'm not going to be shy about saying that. And that's my own stuff. But like, if I can find ways to like this is an outlet of like, what can I learn today that will help ease my anxiety, and be an outlet for my ADHD and my hyperfocus and all of that. And part of that is like, oh, what else can I learn about this animal that I'm not doing right now? Um, and how different are they from this? And uh, also, what you're talking about before made me think of like, watching how they use what we offer, and then going from that, like, for example, with my Japanese rat, I had a consult with Roy actually, and he helped me like dial in my heating and lighting. And I was like, I got it almost, but I need help. And put a bulb in there. And I was like, I'm going to test out the wattage, and I'm going to sit here working, and I'm going to keep watching as it climbs. And everybody's like, yeah, they don't go higher than 84. That's their hot spot, and they need it really cool on that side. And I watched as it got to like 87, 88. She was basking. She loved it. And she does it
Yeah.
every day. She comes out, she basks up high, then she basks lower, and then she goes to her cool side, and then she comes back. It's not too hot for her. And I looked up temperatures, and I'm like, it does get in the 80s and 90s there sometimes, Now I just have to figure out brumation.
Well, and so that's an interesting thing too, right? Is air temperature 80s and 90s. And then what do you think the surface temperature of a rock is? And
Yeah,
then
it's gonna get
are they
hot.
going and that rock is absorbing that heat. And what did Thomas
Radiation.
Griffiths say it's called? It's a
Infrared
black
C.
body. Yeah, the black body
Radiation.
heat source, or whatever it is. Smart people stuff. But that
I learned so much from that.
oh yeah, he's a great resource and a great guy. But it's those sort of things where is that absorbing all that heat, and then when the snakes come out at, let's say, 6 p.m. and it's dusk, and are they going to that surface that could be still 100 degrees, if the air temperature is 80 to 90? I mean, take a temp gun outside on an 80 or 90 degree day and walk around and temp gun things around your yard, and see what it is in the shade at the base of a tree, and what it is under a rock, and what it is on top of a rock. And it's such a, there's so much more available to these animals in their environment.
And
that
if
it's
they
so
have
funny.
the space to get away, if they have opportunity to choose, that is my core. That's at my core of what I want to like help people with, is like give them the opportunity to choose. So she could have gotten away from that. And if she never went back to it, I'd be like, okay, that's too hot. But she didn't. And if you can give them this like wide variety and watch what they do. And as long as they can get away from it when they want to, then it's probably fine.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of this comes from animals getting burned in captivity. Right. And that's a real thing, is that
for sure
they can definitely burn themselves. They can go to a spot that is too hot, like way too hot. That's why those reptile rocks are so horrible. And, or if somebody has too powerful of a bulb, too close to a basking, so it's all within reason, right? Like you have to say like, okay, is this something, because they might feel it. They might feel the heat and say, hey, this feels good. And maybe they need more of that. But then at the same time, is it at a level that they would never experience in nature? And is it something that their body isn't adapted to then it could be deleterious to them and cause damage?
Yeah, true. But I would say that I think, as far as those hot rocks go, like most of the people using those weren't using basking lamps and all the other stuff. So the snake or reptile is going to get the heat that it needs to regulate its body temperature and be an ectotherm. And that's its only choice to do so. So I think more often than not, those accidents are that, rather than completely overheating, although that happens. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. We need to, you got to test your heat and your humidity for days before you put the animal in. You got to make sure you watch. Like I do that now, as I spend, sometimes I'll finish an enclosure. I'll finish my fancy enclosure, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta wait for got to go for a few days and see how it goes, nighttime, daytime, if I have heat in the room, if I don't, and watch what happens and play with that. And I think that's important. But
yeah,
sorry.
and giving the opportunity to not sacrifice safety to get to the temperatures that
Yes.
they need. Like that's one of the biggest things. And that was
huge.
And that was Nick Mutton's point, is that if there's not enough safety and security, they will sacrifice their well-being to achieve safety. That's number one priority in a snake's mind, is safety and security. So if they feel safest on top of an ice block, they're going to go to that, even though it's going to end very badly for them.
Totally. Yeah, the more using the space as much as possible and cluttering it, and it's I think to a lot of newer keepers it's counterintuitive. You're like, you want to see the snake, but you're probably going to see it more if you give it more hiding spots. So let's get away from this minimum again of like a hide over here and a hide over here, and like make it so that snake can get from one side to the other completely hidden if it wants to. And you're probably going to see it out more because it's going to start to feel safer. And
and I've said this before, a hide doesn't have to be a cup that they go under. Or a log. It's my Argentine boa, she has probably 75% of her enclosure is like this palm right here. She's got multiple of those lining the back of the enclosure. So she can sprawl out completely hidden behind those with just her head poking out. That's a hide. She knows that she's covered. She knows that she's, sheltered from the UV, right? Like if she wants to get away from her lighting, if she wants to, feel secure, she can go in there and totally disappear.
Yeah.
And so that's, I see like you have tons of plants in your enclosures. Where do you get your plants from? Where are you sourcing those?
The fake ones, honestly, these are okay, but I've stepped it up recently. I stopped looking for fake plants that are marketed for reptiles because those are crap.
Yeah, screw that.
They're horrible.
So much money.
I've found some awesome ones on Amazon, and I specifically look for like the ones that people use in offices and homes where it's like it's supposed to look really real. And I found some really cool stuff. And so the last two enclosures, I've like been like, wow, these are awesome. They look really real. It's cool. And then I use more of them too. And I'm like using them to do what you're doing with your plants. And like they can go through them and hide behind them, and I'll see their little faces kind of poking through the leaves, and that makes me really happy. I mean, I have some live plants in all of my enclosures. They're potted though, and like some of my snakes, my MBK loves to kill plants. It's like her hobby. She's just like, ooh, thanks. Dig, toss it up, break it. Like it's like I put them in there basically now for enrichment because I know she's going to like kill most of them.
And that's okay.
That's okay. She enjoys it. I try not to get too frustrated. We'll see how long the plant lasts.
Yeah.
She has fun with it. It's okay.
I'll need you to send me some links for where you're getting your fake plants.
Yeah.
Because I go to Hobby Lobby, and Michael's is almost always a bust. Like I can't find anything.
Too.
Well, yeah, they're expensive, and they don't have anything tropical. It's like all like not, at least not tropical, and then at a manageable size that'll fit inside of an enclosure. Whereas Hobby Lobby, like these palms, they're like super cheap, and so I go in and I'll buy them.
That's cool.
Yeah, they look good, and I just do a plaster of Paris in like a deli cup, and I stick it down in that, and then the snakes can't flip it over. easily. They still flip them
Smart.
over. Yeah. So it's,
I always have to do things the difficult way. I'm like making these like mounds with PVC in it that I put them.
Yeah. So I had to trim the base off. I think I take like maybe 2.5 inches off the base of those palms. And then I just mix up my plaster Paris and I stick it in there. And I've done the same thing with some ferns now for my Antaresia enclosures. And, they look good and I'm really happy with them. And the cool thing about Hobby Lobby is they'll have like sales like buy, like 40% off or 50% off, for stuff like that.
I don't know if we have Hobby Lobby. I'll have to look. Yeah, I've just been getting mine off Amazon, but I'll send you some links to some really nice ones because I spent a long time looking.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know. I've filled up my cart on Amazon, and then I'm like, what if I get these and they're like this big? What if they're like the size of the palm of my hand, or what if they're this big? It's so hard to tell.
Do you have measurements on the?
I don't trust them. I don't trust the measurements on Amazon.
I've only gotten one that I was like, this one's not as nice. I just got one that I'm like, the photo wasn't really great, but I got a bunch that are really, really cool and naturalistic. So I'll send you the links.
Yeah, for sure.
The ferns are really cool.
Nice.
Those are my favorite.
Are they fabric or are they plastic?
No fabric. No, I don't. Because I want to be able to rinse them, sterilize them. That's part of another reason why fake plants are awesome is because A, they're not going to die, and B, if they get pooped or peed on, you can take them out, hose them down, sterilize it, and then put it back in. So that's kind of
these ones here are like a polyester kind of fabric.
Okay.
But it's not. Yeah, you can still wash it and everything. Trust me, I've done it numerous times.
All right.
Yeah, those ones are solid. The ferns I got from Hobby Lobby are really nice, and those are totally plastic. So those ones are cool too.
I think I felt like the silk might degrade or get stained or whatever. So
it probably will.
But yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to talk about as far as enclosures, or do you think that's
no? I think we went into it. We went down the rabbit hole with that. I think we can move on.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or because I have something I want to talk about?
Ask me.
Well, it's something we're going to disagree on, so let's get into it, because I want to have a constructive disagreement.
Okay.
And I want to talk about it. And we started to talk about it right before we started the podcast. Okay, so I had said I think that you need tubs for baby animals. That you can't take a baby spotted python and throw it right into a 3x2x2 or a 4x2x2. And you said you are incorrect, good sir. And so
I did not say it that way.
You said this is going to be a terrible podcast, and it's off. No,
I did not.
But so my whole thing is well, let me preface this with a couple things. So I've had a couple snakes that I have put into larger enclosures, and they went off feeding, and that was with a lot of foliage and all that. So I kind of put them back to where they were, and then they went back to feeding. Now, after talking to people about this, they said, well, why didn't you put the smaller enclosure that they were in into the larger enclosure, put a top on it that's cracked open, and give them the option to come out if they want.
Yeah.
So I still have to experiment with that. But another concern of mine is baby Antaresia are so tiny. I mean, they are just the tiniest little worms when quite often when you get them from a breeder. And for me personally, for comfort, I've lost 2 children's pythons in my life. So yeah, so I have a little bit of
Trauma.
trauma that I'm carrying with me, that I don't want that to happen again. Right now,
Of course.
this was way back when I was keeping previously in like 2011 or 12, uh, and they just, I put them into a decent sized enclosure, and Antaresia have a strong food response once they get started. So they continue to eat, no problem. But all of a sudden, where did they go? And I look at some of, the mesh for the lighting, and they could go through that for sure. They could fit
Wow.
through that, because
Really?
you want, yeah, I mean, well, and you want a larger mesh for the
Right.
UV to get through.
Right. Exactly.
Uh, Even some of these ventilation slots, like I don't want to risk it, so
Oh,
that's where I'm
yeah. I actually
that.
blocked the ventilation with window screen
Mm,
on this one, because I moved. This was for a baby, and
okay.
she was a little bit bigger than the ventilation, but I didn't trust it. So for a
Yeah.
while, I had screen over the ventilation. Yeah, I get it.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Also, carpet pythons, I've had carpet pythons get, even going from like one tub size to another, where all of a sudden they're like, I don't want food anymore because now I'm scared, or, and going through that. And it's, there's, so that's kind of where I'm coming from and I think that's where a lot of keepers, or caretakers, are coming from, is that they are they're coming they're looking at this from a perspective of, I want the animal to be secure, I want them to have their gradient, but I want it to be in a small enough area where they're going to be able to find it easily. They're
Right.
not going to say like, okay, I feel super secure in this 90-degree spot, and I think I'm just going to stay here forever, and then not venture out and go to the other area. I think that there's a lot of good intentions on both sides of this spectrum of this argument. I feel like both sides are thinking it's best for the animal, right? And I
Hmm.
think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think that there's a lot of people out there that are going, I really hate this snake I just got, therefore I'm going to keep it in a drawer, and because I really hate it. I don't think that a
No.
lot of people are coming from that place, so I'd like to hear your argument, for why you think an Antaresia could go into a larger enclosure and be just fine.
Okay. So a couple of things. we are getting these animals from situations where they are hatched or born and put directly into tubs in general, right? Because that's the practice for most breeders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that creates this, it sets a precedent for a lot of these animals. So that suggestion of putting a tub in a larger enclosure is one that I think is awesome for the hobby, or whatever you want to call it, because most breeders are starting off their snakes in tubs, and so they are used to that. However, if you think about it, it's not like snakes are born in tubs in the wild. Like they're not put into tubs. Like they have temperature variation, they have sunlight, they have predation, they have all these different things, and they may not survive most of the time because they'll get eaten by something, which they're not going to have that in captivity, right? But that part is where I go when people say baby snakes need to be in tiny enclosures to survive and to eat. That's where I go, no. That doesn't make any sense. Let's not think that way. Now, some are going to have trouble getting established. And in my mind, it's like, well, do what you need to do to get that animal established. But my default is, let's offer it what is natural to it and give it options and give it lots and lots of hiding and lots of cover, and don't scare the crap out of it. Obviously it's going to be scared because it's tiny, noodle with a head, right? But I would like to see us default to that as opposed to defaulting to starting it off in a situation where it gets used to these four walls and this is security and oh my God, there's a giant monkey in it. Oh, food. And then it's back to that. You know what I mean? We're setting this up. And from my experience, and you know, I'm on this podcast, The Expert and the Idiot. I don't consider myself an expert, but I do have experience. And from what I see, you know, for example, my Japanese rat snake, 2 feet for her was not enough. Not enough. And I also couldn't give her the gradient that I wanted to give her. That was challenging in a tinier enclosure. And man, as soon as I put her in the 4-foot, she thrives. She loves it. She's all over the place. She's basking out in the open. She's, you know, and she's like a noodle this big, you know, and I never had problems eating. I haven't had these problems. Now, when I had one of my snakes, one of them, when she was a baby, she was refusing food. Her half sister was fine, all over the place, climbing, wanted lots of space. And this one, I was having trouble. And I just cluttered the hell out of her enclosure. I gave it just double the amount. Started eating. And then over time, because that was her personality, it took her longer. Now she'll come out onto my hand. She's totally bold. She never misses a meal, you know. So it is an individual. And I think we should treat them that way. But it doesn't make sense to me to deprive an animal of the right types of infrared, right? And the UVB, and to put it in this tiny tub as a default. That just doesn't make sense.
Sure.
So that's where I come from. I'm not saying, also, I wanted to say, I have to say this because I said it before and we weren't recording. I'm not saying that racks and tubs don't have a purpose at all ever. You know, that there are use cases for these things, but I don't think they should be the default.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're keeping a lot of animals and you know you're going through the breeding season, the space requirements, it works better, you know, in that, and not even like talking about the ball python guy that has 200 ball pythons and they're gonna have 150 ball pythons come, you know, breeding season or whatever. Just looking at it as I have. You know, what if you have a really nice, diverse collection of rare species that, you know, that there's a demand for in the hobby, from that perspective, from an economy of space and time, it's in that situation, in my personal opinion, that there is an argument for racks for babies in that situation, where it's easier to monitor health. It's easier to monitor feeding, stools, you know, everything, you know, and then there's people like Paul Duran that, you know, he's keeping his baby scrubs in 2x2s, right?
Yep.
And
I know other
together.
people who do that too, you know,
yeah,
and their babies go right into fully decked out enclosures and they're fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really cool part is that, you know, that works for them. And so it's different. It's a different way of approaching, you know, similar outcome or trying to get to a similar outcome, you know.
Well,
and
it's also a difference between, you know, making money, right, as a breeder. Because if you need to keep hundreds of snakes, obviously that's an income source, right?
Sure.
You're using it as, because you don't have hundreds and hundreds of snakes as pets. Like, if you do, I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
that's
that means that they're products.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I have trouble with that sometimes.
Yeah. It is. And that is what built the hobby too. That's, that is an unfortunate reality. If you're on that side of the argument, is if people weren't breeding animals in mass, and if they weren't taking the animals from their natural environment and putting them into plastic boxes, then there would be no hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
but when you know better, you do better.
Sure.
You can do
Yeah.
better,
And
right? So
yeah.
if we start to know that this is detrimental, if we start to acknowledge that these animals have way more intelligence and emotional capacity than we thought, and there are studies on this coming out more and more, if we take that into consideration and we go, hey, we didn't know, now we're learning this, so let's be open to giving them more and acknowledging their sentience a little bit more and caring for them, not like things.
Yeah. No, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. I mean, and I'm a total, I love my Argentine boa is, I mean, I have a relationship with her akin to the one I have with my dog, and so it's, I would never say like, oh, nonsense. A snake isn't a pet. A snake is, something that you keep and observe or whatever. I don't agree with that. And I don't think that that's, I personally, I can't agree with that. But now one thing I do want to say about your point about in nature, they're not born in, in tubs and things like that. The interesting thing to me is what do we provide? And this is across the board, every single breeder. What do we provide a female to lay her eggs in? It's generally a tub with a hole in it. What
did Paul Duran offer?
It was a tote with a hole in it. So
well, they're adaptive. They'll find whatever works for them in the wild, right? So if that's what works, if that's what they have, they're going to use it.
Sure. And but like in nature, we find them often, a mother will lay eggs in the smallest, most cramped, secure possible place, right? To avoid predation. I mean, the poor turtles that I see at work, they go out and they lay their nest and the crows are like sitting there 3 feet away watching them. And they're like, go back in that water, dum dum.
Race of the sea turtles to the, it's so sad to watch.
Yeah, it's absolutely like nature is terrible that way. And snakes are really good at finding the most secure place to have their babies. There's I think it's called Queen of the Pythons on Smithsonian. I've talked about it a bunch. It's the best snake documentary out there that Smithsonian has done. Write it down. And it is it shows like her whole life leading up to her breeding, and then finding this, I think it's like a hollowed out log or something. And she goes in there and lays her eggs and incubates them. And then she gives birth to them, and she actually hangs out with them for quite a while. Like she stays with the babies, and the babies all stay with each other in this small kind of confined area until they're ready. And then that's when they
shed, right? And they go and eat.
I would have to watch it again. And I need to watch it again. My kids have been asking me to watch it again because it's like saved on I forgot what channel that's on, but yes, watch that.
I'm definitely going to watch that. I'm sure it's, like we're talking very generally here. And there are
Sure.
like 4,000 different species of snakes that do different
Absolutely.
things, right?
Yeah.
And what I have issue with is that we're treating a lot of these species exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody could have a rack of this species and a rack of this species, and the only thing different is one of them has more humidity, you know. And there's the other part to that is the cognitive development that we're not offering to them without giving them any, you know, enrichment. And there's also the part to you know, stimulating their biological processes, all of that includes feeding response. But I hear you. I mean, that makes sense. Like they're in a little tiny hole with their mom, but then they go eat. They go eat out there. And I'm sure they're like rattlesnakes will return to their dens. That makes sense. They'll come back, but they have to go out there to eat. It's not like they're staying in there to be fed.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something to the idea of them exploring in order to hunt that we're not offering them in a bin. So we wonder why they don't take it. I don't know. I'm not saying that scientifically speaking. I'm just saying, wondering about it.
Also, to be totally fair, we're saying, why aren't you taking this prey item? Are they
that
eating a European white mouse? You know, are they eating a lab mouse out in the wild? Or are they starting on little geckos and frogs, which nobody would ever want to feed their animal in captivity? Because if you feed a frog is a little parasite sack, you know, so it would be detrimental to the animal, right? Out in nature, I don't know how, but they're killing it out in nature, you know, but so it is nothing about what we do is natural to begin with. That's the crazy part.
Exactly. I know. I mean, keeping them in boxes, it's like we're keeping them in boxes. I mean, I can't wait someday to have a place where I can let them free roam. And feel like I would not lose my mind with fear and anxiety because they would get lost or hurt. I don't have that kind of space right now. But yeah, keeping them in boxes is enough. Like it's not natural. So what can we do to make it better?
How can we optimize it? How can we optimize it? Because it's all trade-offs, right? Like there is no one solution. And so a lot of us are in this situation where we ended up getting snakes. I mean, they covered this. I remember it was Lucas Lee on Roy's podcast, and they were talking about if the hobby was never a thing and it all of a sudden just became a thing, would any of us even want to keep these animals? And you would probably be so off put by it that you would probably say, no, why would I want to take this beautiful, majestic animal and stuff it into a box in my house? That's crazy.
Right.
Like if reptile keeping wasn't a hobby up until today, would you be able to say with good conscience, yes, I want to take these animals and stick them into a PVC box in my house?
I think yes. And here's some reasons why. I've talked to so many people who have been like, yeah, when I was a kid, I'd find these wild snakes and I'd bring them inside and I'd keep them under my bed, or I'd keep them in a box just to watch them. And like, they weren't thinking about the hobby. They were just really wanting to engage with these animals. And then the other thing is, you know, I didn't know anything about keeping, but when I fell in love with these animals, it was like this feels so good in my soul. And I feel so enthralled with this. I just need to be around this animal. Like I need this contact. It's making me feel so many things positively. And I watch that happen with people all the time through my work with the Little Zoo. You know, people who go from, no way, I'm not touching that animal, to, wow, you know?
Yeah.
And they don't think about, they think keeping is weird. They think
Sure.
the whole, like
It
you
is
have
weird.
snakes in your house, like, or you have reptiles. What? It's weird. But suddenly they're like, I would love this animal in my life. I could do that.
Yeah.
So I think they would. They
Yeah.
might, you know?
Well, but the whole thing is, and you brought up like being a child, and that's that childlike curiosity and sort of doing, just like, I mean, I had an Eastern collared lizard when I was younger, and it died from metabolic bone disease. And so that was because of improper husbandry, right? And I would actually take anoles that I would catch, and I would bring them in and put them in little critter keepers and be like, here's some ground beef. Will you eat that? I'm not kidding. That's reality. So
Yeah,
even
I've heard
though
those
I was
stories.
doing it, was it the best thing to do? And then if the hobby wasn't a thing and it became a thing today, would me as a 34-year-old say, oh yeah, I want to do that for sure. Like I want to, just, and yes, keeping snakes makes me feel good, but would it be the best thing for the animal?
Right.
And then I totally understand what you're saying from an outreach perspective, that you are breaking all of these walls down, and you're probably doing so much for snakes as a whole out in nature by having this one ambassador that is kept in a box, even though that sounds really sad when you say it.
It does.
that all the other, like all the other Argentine boas are being majestic. There's a picture of one like snatching some sort of a falcon out of the air from a tree, right? And so it's doing all this cool boa stuff out in nature that my animals will never be able to experience because they're kept in a box, and she gets her wet rat.
But these are ambassadors that can help other people recognize the value of wild animals.
Yes.
And they were born in captivity, so I didn't snatch them out.
Yeah.
Now they came from, their ancestors were wild, but I get that. I'm not. But yeah, I think we are stuck a little bit. And I think it's time for us to kind of deconstruct how we've built things, because we've built things in a certain way and people have real hard time letting go of how things are, how things should be. And it's like, maybe not. Let's rethink it. Let's think like you just did. Let's just think about how could we start this over? What would be the best thing for the animals if we're going to keep them in captivity with all that we know now?
Mm-hmm.
With all that we can read and access about their climate and their habitat and all those things, instead of what have we been doing? That's kind of just what I want people to think about. And I think some people really are, and I love seeing it. But I also see a lot of the opposite.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you a lot for talking to all of these different people. And I can see it in you and hear it in you. Like, you're just like, I want to learn. And that's what we should be doing to benefit the animals. Like, keeping them is a selfish thing. We are doing a selfish thing.
It is, totally.
I mean, you have to admit that. You can't get away with like, no, I'm doing this for the animal. No, it's a selfish thing. But how can we mitigate that a little bit?
But my animals are lucky.
They are free from predation. They have food, and all year round. They are taken care of. They actually have pretty good lives.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Well, and even just from a keeper perspective, you go to a reptile show and you walk around and you're like, God, my snakes are so lucky.
Yeah, please don't leave with an animal today. Please don't go.
I think I've told this story before, but the last time I went to Repticon, there's people everywhere bumping into each other, and I hear this sickening slap, like a baked potato being dropped on the ground, and I hear this mother like, "What are you doing?" And like like yelling at her kid, and I turn around and he's like picking this ball python up off the floor that they just bought. So little dude's like walking around holding this ball python. Now, if I was the parent and it was my kid and he was getting a snake, I'd be like, hey, he's got to stay in his in his container right now. He's super stressed out. He's terrified. This is not the time to start socializing with him. He's gonna go into quarantine. He's gonna be there for maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks without us even messing with him. We're gonna change out his water and we're gonna offer him food, and that is it. We're not gonna take him out. It's not gonna be hang out on the couch time and all that. So yeah, it's when I get my snakes, I'm like, you're a lucky snake, because as far as
you're an empathetic person.
As far as where you could have ended up, on the Florida Repticon, it's
oh God. See, this is why, yeah. So this is what I want to foster is, a lot of what I talk about on my channel, always is empathy and compassion. If we foster this, we will treat the animals better. We will think a little bit more about what it might be like to be this tiny noodle with a head and being approached by this giant predator. We will think a little bit more about how to be kind to each other too. I mean, we'll think a little bit more about when we walk outside and we see a living thing, that we're less likely to act with hate against it or treat it like a pest. All of these things are connected to empathy and compassion. And I think fostering that more and also being open to science and learning new things and not being stuck in your ways. I think this is such a valuable thing to be talking about. And agreeing to disagree where we need to, but believing in science is important.
Yeah. And that is the big thing, is agreeing to disagree and appreciating each other in the hobby, appreciating the breeders and appreciating the people like yourself that give a little snake a 10-foot enclosure, and just finding the value in each other for everything that we can bring to the table, and being a unified front to keep our rights as keepers as well, because how devastating would it be if we lost the ability to keep these animals because we were so obsessed with how we keep these animals individually, and
we really
and obviously
need to work together here.
Yeah, with ethics at the front of our mind. Like everybody should have ethics at the front of their mind, that their animals are being kept ethically and with the stimulus that animal needs to thrive, not just survive and live a long, healthy life.
I think the problem is a lot of people don't even realize the difference between thriving and surviving. And they don't take the moment to be like, I mean, I literally had someone tell me snakes don't feel happy or sad. They don't have emotions. And in the next comment said, my snakes are happy in their racks. And I was just like, oh my God, there's so much to unpack here, but I don't even know if it's worth it. Like, it's just like,
if it was in comments, it's never worth it.
He engaged with me. He kept trying to ask me about this stuff. And then he would just say these things that I was just like, oh God.
Yeah.
But they don't even realize. They're like, they're fine.
Yeah.
What is fine acceptable for your dog is fine acceptable for your kid.
Yeah.
Like, we have a responsibility here. If I think that we need to take the responsibility more seriously, and keep those ethics in mind, and then also talk about these ethics a lot more. Like, what is ethical? Is it ethical what we're doing right now?
Yeah.
Because I see stuff that I don't believe it is, but there's no rules.
Yeah.
There's no rules. There's rules for other animals, but there's no rules in reptile world. So that's where we get into a little tricky business, because then people have their opinions. So yeah, let's just all talk about this stuff. And like, I respect people who've been doing things for a long time and it's worked for them and yada yada, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't think about what I'm talking about too.
Yeah.
And just take it in a little bit. Just like I can take
Absolutely.
in what their experience is. And we can all learn from each other and not hate on each other and discount. Yeah.
Yeah, and like that comment you said before by the unnamed person, content creator, they go talk to a breeder. Definitely go talk to breeders, but talk to keepers and talk to people that have gone herping and actually seen these animals in their natural environment. But if you want to reproduce the animal, talk to the breeder. For sure, ask them, what did you do? What triggers did you use to trigger an ovulation? How long did they go without food? When did you provide higher humidity? All these questions. But if you have a question about behavior or temperature requirements, iNaturalist is your friend.
Yeah. Exactly.
Go listen to Dr. Justin Julander's podcast and listen to some of the herping adventures and his experiences.
Something that's talked about a lot is how reptiles are low maintenance and they're cheap.
Nobody's been to my house yet.
Yeah, I'm telling you, every bit of my money goes into there. Like, they're not cheap. And if you're doing it right, they're probably not easy or low maintenance. Like, it takes a lot of work and presence to do it at a high level, at like a level that I feel is ethical. And that is, making sure every day that you're tapped into this and thinking about these things and doing all this research. And people just do no research and they just get the animal. And then they're like, how do I take care of it? And it's so backwards. It's so backwards. Like, nobody should be leaving a reptile expo with a new animal that they do not know how to take care of.
Yeah.
And they do it all the time. Oh,
yeah. Yep.
Nobody should be selling to somebody where they're like not vetting them. Do you have the enclosure? Do you have this? Do you have this? But they just do it. And it's accepted. Yet with dogs, to adopt a dog, you have to go through a lot. And I think, we could learn something from that. I'm not saying like, let's do that for reptiles, but there's a reason for it. Because they're living beings. So, yeah. Sorry, I went off on a tirade there.
No, you're fine. All right. Well, I guess we'll. Are you ready to wrap it up? Did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on?
And one more thing, and I think it ties in with that, is shame-free education. That I make a point to always talk about how I'm constantly improving and learning, and that I am not perfect, that I'm not an expert at everything. That it's constantly improvement and being relatable. I think that's really important. And I'd like to see us, with all the big opinions and all of that, to still be able to have conversations like this. Or if somebody is very uneducated, to try and approach them in such a way where it's not shaming them, but trying to educate them in a positive way to encourage them to be better. And I think that is really, really, really important. And it's for the animals' benefit. It's for the animals. Because if you shame somebody, they're going to not want to ask any more questions, and they're going to do the wrong thing for their animal, and their animal is going to suffer. Right.
Yeah. And if you're one of those people that you can't deal with that, then stay off of the Facebook groups, and just stay out of it. It would probably be better. I'm one of those people. I have a very hard, like when somebody posts a picture of an animal that is in bad shape, and they're like, I don't understand why my chameleon won't, stop laying on its back, or whatever. And then I'm like, oh, I have to leave this group right now because I am going to lose my mind. Like I can't even see, and I'm not one to comment, but I can't even deal with seeing the pictures, because it's like seeing an abused child or puppy or whatever. Like it's just instantaneous. I recoil from it and I cannot deal with it.
It's very hard. I have to take a deep breath first.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially if someone's asking me something or asking me for help, and I just have to take a deep breath and try really hard to approach them in a way that's like not, oh my God, how could you do that?
Yeah.
And then sometimes, if they resist though, and that gets really tricky. But I think there's something to approaching people with empathy and compassion too. As much as there's a gut reaction of like, why do you even have that animal?
Yeah.
You shouldn't. Maybe they want to get better. Let's help them get better. I kept my BCI with a red light and on newspaper. Like, but look where I am now. So we can only, I think it's important to help that, to do the shame-free education and keep talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, and I was one of those people. I had my Eastern collared lizard that died from MBD. So if it would have been nowadays and I was younger and I would have posted that picture and been like, I don't know what's going on here. This doesn't seem right. How come he can't open his mouth and, all this, but it was terrible. It was horrible. But I think I got it from a pet store. I went in and they had it and I got it, and the pet, the people that are working at the pet stores, they have no education in regards to caring for animals. Very rarely do you get somebody that's actually, educated with animal care,
Yeah. There's plenty of resources right now. So we just need to like highlight the ones that have evidence-based, science-based care, and keep learning, and don't take it from one place,
Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Shira. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me, and it was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was an honor to be one of the handful of women you've had on this podcast too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, great. You're number
7?
I don't know.
6? I think I tried to count.
I'd have to go back.
It's such an honor. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast and listening to you be curious. It's wonderful. So keep it up. It's awesome. Great job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.